What I'm about to tell you is one of those stories that will make your head spin. You might think it's just a simple business trip, but trust me, when my boss Ricardo is involved, nothing is ever normal. Lately, I've been fed up with my husband Marcos's passivity. The idea of traveling with a man like Ricardo, though it annoyed me, also stirred a thrill I couldn't quite put into words. Don't get me wrong, I love Marcos, but honestly, I felt like something was missing in our marriage. He's kind, never jealous, almost too shy to the point that sometimes it's embarrassing. I looked in the mirror and thought, Sophia, you're 35. You're still alive. You're still an attractive woman. I felt like I had the power to set this place on fire, yet Marcos's calm and lack of passion left me feeling incredibly alone. Ricardo, my boss, was the complete opposite. He was 50 but looked like he was in his 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, charismatic like no one else, and let's not forget that powerful, dominant aura. The moment he walked into a room, people noticed. No matter how much I tried to keep my distance, I couldn't take my eyes off him. Maybe some would say it was wrong, but compared to my husband's passivity, a real man like Ricardo was consuming my thoughts. Our company was about to sign a major acquisition deal, and I had to travel to another city. Normally, I'd drive myself, but Marcos's reaction left me speechless. Why don't you let Ricardo take you, he said in a calm, indifferent tone. It'll be safer, and you won't get too tired. Besides, being alone is enough. I could only think, alone? But instead of confronting him, I just said, fine. A part of me wanted to rebel against Marcos's relaxed attitude, but once again, I did nothing. So, on Monday, right after work, Ricardo and I set off. The thought of spending hours alone with him tangled my anger and excitement into a tight knot inside me. She's married, but she's traveling with another man. Some might say that. But honestly, the fact that Marcos had given me the green light infuriated me. And in some way, it awakened my curiosity about what the hell was going to happen on this trip. I'll tell you everything in detail, how we got stuck in the car and everything that happened from the very beginning. I promise to tell it all. Walking up to Ricardo's massive, imposing SUV made my head spin with a mix of frustration and thrill. Going with Ricardo is no problem. Marcos's voice echoed in my head. Just climbing into that big, dark beast made my heart pound. I guess its sheer presence and the deep roar of the engine reminded me too much of Ricardo himself. As soon as I opened the door and sat on the leather seat, I felt its cool touch against my skin. I realized my skirt had ridden up slightly more than usual. I adjusted quickly, but I caught Ricardo glancing, just for a fraction of a second. The flicker in his eyes said it all. Relax, Sophia. We have a long drive ahead, he said casually as he started the engine. I cleared my throat to mask my nervousness, forcing a normal smile, though excitement coursed through my veins. Wow, this car is as impressive as you are, I blurted out. The words slipped before I could stop them. Normally, I would never say something so direct, but the energy of the moment got to me. Ricardo just chuckled from the driver's seat. This ride gives me a sense of freedom, like it's my own space. Big, strong, and steady. For a second, the way he said it felt like he wasn't describing the car at all. And the way he gripped the steering wheel with that confidence, it made me bite my lip. I couldn't help but think, I wish Marcos could be like this. Before this story gets any crazier, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for more updates. And by the way, I'd love your support with comments and likes. We hit the road. A light rain had started to fall, and as we drove along the slick asphalt, illuminated only by the headlights, the car's interior was quieter than I expected. The only sounds were the soft purring of the engine and the gentle tapping of raindrops on the window. For a while, silence ruled. Then, Ricardo was the one to break it. Sophia, we've been to a few business dinners together before, but we've never taken a long trip like this. How does it feel? His question surprised me. Normally, he didn't talk much outside of work. A small smile crept onto my lips. It feels a little strange. I had always assumed he worried about overloading me with responsibilities, but now, here we were, driving down a road neither of us knew well. Ricardo glanced away from the road for just a second to look at me. Maybe I don't know enough about you, Sophia. Maybe I want to learn more. At that moment, my heart skipped a beat, then picked up speed. I wasn't used to hearing things like that from my boss. At the same time, I shifted in my seat, pretty sure my skirt had ridden up a little more. I could feel Ricardo's gaze there. I noticed that he hadn't said a word about it for almost half an hour. The car pushed forward in silence, a strange tension growing between us. I asked a few small questions now and then, and he answered briefly. But there was an unspoken layer in everything he said, something growing between us. Just then, a warning light flashed on the dashboard. The check engine light. A sudden look of surprise crossed Ricardo's face. "This car never breaks down," he muttered. "Let's pull over." By now, the rain had started coming down harder. Almost no cars were passing by, and there were no signs of life around. Finally, he found a spot to pull over and shut off the engine. After turning it off, he tapped the steering wheel. "See? I think I jinxed it. I said my car never breaks down, and boom, something happens." I hoped it wasn't anything serious. A bit of unease crept in, the isolation, the rain, it all added to the tension. But maybe it also fed the curiosity and excitement stirring inside me. "So, what do we do now?" The sky was getting darker. Ricardo looked up at the darkening sky due to the rain, then turned back to me with confident eyes and a faint smile. "I remember seeing a gas station not too far from here. Maybe we can drive there to check it out. But first, let me take a look." With that, he rolled down the window slightly and stretched out, allowing raindrops to splash inside. Sitting in the car, I felt both awkward and strangely drawn to him. I realized that my boss usually didn't concern himself with things like this. Normally, he would just check in with me, talk about work, and that was it. But tonight, it was clear he was in a different mood. Just as I was thinking that, I looked down at my dress. Was I revealing too much? I wondered, only to see Ricardo staring at me. I had no choice but to take a deep breath. Yes, we were stuck in a car, in the middle of nowhere, with a broken-down vehicle, and the rain wasn't going to stop anytime soon. The questions in my mind grew louder. What was going to happen tonight, Sophia? Ricardo spent a moment trying to get a signal on his phone. But with the downpour and the windows nearly washed clean, I could hear him mumbling, "If we're lucky, we might get some coverage." I watched from a distance, trying to read his expression. After a minute or two of talking on the phone, he turned to me with a slight smile. "Unfortunately, the rescue team might take about 5 hours to get here. And it turns out, there's no gas station nearby after all." That meant we had no choice but to spend the time here, in the car. Hearing that, I felt a strange sensation inside me. Part of me was uneasy about being stranded in such a remote place so late at night. But another part of me felt incredibly nervous, being alone with Ricardo, with no one around to interrupt us. My heart pounded, the tension almost overwhelming. Inside the car, I sat there, listening to the sound of the rain hitting the window as Ricardo slowly moved closer. At first, there was silence. Then, he looked at me and said, "I want to hear something from you, Sophia." I looked at him, unsure of what he meant. Normally, as my boss, our conversations were strictly professional. We never talked about personal matters. But at this moment, his face seemed particularly warm. I could still see that strong confidence in his eyes, but for some reason, I also sensed something else, like he wanted me to feel at ease. Or maybe he had a completely different intention. I couldn't tell. But there was something in his tone that made me soften. And I couldn't help myself. I clutched my dress slightly and whispered, "What do you want to hear?" As he spoke, I absent-mindedly played with the hem of my dress, feeling his eyes fixed on me. Almost without thinking, I brushed my dark hair off my shoulder. Ricardo lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret. For example, he said, "We've worked together all this time, but I still don't really know what you want, what you like. It's like you're constantly hiding." That statement hit me hard. It was as if he had reached into the part of me that had felt so repressed in my marriage, the lack of connection, the distance I had carried inside me for so long. I wanted to be honest, but I hesitated. My voice was quiet as I murmured, "I don't hide that much." The space between us had almost disappeared. Under the dim light inside the car, my eyes met Ricardo's, and an unexplainable tension filled the air. I could hear his breathing grow heavier, matching my own. At that moment, I swore I would never forget it. It was as if we were frozen in time, both wondering what to say next. Finally, he broke the silence, his words soft yet deliberate. "Sophia," he said. Just hearing him say my name sent shivers down my spine. And in that instant, when words were no longer enough, it felt like we were caught in some kind of invisible force. Before I knew it, I was leaning forward, seeing him move closer to me. My pulse quickened. We were so close, I could feel the warmth between us, hear the steady rhythm of our breaths. Before I could stop myself, my mind screamed, "Sophia, stop." But my body ignored it. The distance, the emotions I had held inside for so long, and Ricardo's undeniable presence, all of it swirled in my head at once. I closed my eyes and let the moment take over. For a few seconds, my heartbeat pounded so hard that it seemed to echo in my ears. I couldn't deny the energy between us, and Ricardo clearly felt it too. His expression was steady yet gentle, as if he understood everything I wasn't saying. In that moment, all hesitation vanished. Ricardo gently placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me. I could see the intent in his gaze, but his actions were patient. At that moment, everything around us seemed to fade away. And I let myself be carried by the moment. The moment our breaths intertwined, it was as if we both suddenly remembered something. We pulled apart slightly. Outside, the rain was pouring harder than ever. Our words became nearly meaningless, our eyes met, and then I realized, my dress had slipped down. I grabbed it, practically throwing it onto the front seat in a panic. My heart was still pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe how fast everything had happened, the way it ended. After making that decision, I now found myself in this situation. It was cold, but the rain on my skin felt strangely refreshing. It also heightened the adrenaline rushing through my veins. I was too overwhelmed to say anything. I hurried to the back seat of the SUV. As I moved, I noticed how spacious it seemed, perhaps even comfortable. Ricardo followed me without a word. The moment we reached the back seat, he wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me closer. The warmth of his body, the strength in his hold. His distinct scent erased every lingering thought from my mind as our lips met again. The sound of the rain outside felt like background music. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and the storm inside me was pulling me into another world. All I could think about was how every second of this moment would be etched into my memory for a very long time. Under the dim light of the car, I looked up at the ceiling, then back at Ricardo as he gazed down at me. The moment I ran my fingers through his hair, something inside me ignited. There was no one around for miles, so I wasn't afraid of making any noise. I could let myself feel everything I was feeling, it was intense and incredible. Ricardo never stopped. He seemed relentless, yet in between, he would glance at me and say, "You're beautiful." It felt unreal, like I was in a dream. His incredible physique stunned me, and the weight of his presence made me fully aware of him. When I tried to joke, still stammering, "My boss is here too," my voice trembled. And then, a wave of overwhelming emotion crashed over me. I heard him say, "You still have a few more hours here with your boss." My eyes widened at his words, and just imagining what was coming next made me feel dizzy. I wished this night would never end. Suddenly, exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. I could barely keep my eyes open. The rain outside kept pouring relentlessly, its sound blending into the dim light of the car seats. Our breaths were still intertwined as Ricardo moved closer, pressing a firm hand against my waist. His gaze was calm yet burning with intensity. That look both steadied me and sent my heart racing. "I know about Marcos, your husband," he murmured, his voice so soft and confident that it sent shivers through me. My heartbeat quickened. "I can see it in your eyes, it hasn't been enough for you. But after tonight, you won't be missing anything anymore." Then, he gave me a slight smile. That smile unleashed a storm of indescribable emotions inside me. At that moment, I felt like I was in a dream, time ceased to exist. We were trapped in this car, the rain outside refusing to stop, and any help was still far away. Hearing Ricardo's bold words reminded me once again, there was no quick escape from this. He looked into my eyes as if silently saying, "We'll be here for many more hours." And from the way things were going, it seemed like we'd be stuck in this town for at least another day. As we set off again, he flashed that signature smile of his. I leaned my head back against the seat and sighed, exhausted. "I guess this night will never end," I mumbled to myself, feeling the whirlwind of excitement and confusion inside me. The truth was, I knew, after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. I can't wait to tell you what happens next, when we finally arrive in town, when the business meeting begins, and when we settle in. Next time, we'll do crazier things. And if you've made it this far, I know this story has captivated you. Don't miss what's coming next, hit the follow button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about this story. I'd love to hear your thoughts.